Today's video is sponsored by Surfshark VPN. Regular viewers will recall that the last time they sponsored a video I was captured by airship pirates for reasons unrelated to Surfshark. So it was that Lionel and I found ourselves spirited off to the mountain stronghold of the notorious Prince Shadrach, the evil supervillain who seeks to destroy the nations of the world. "Prince Shadrach," I said as I stood trembling before him, "why do you seek this destruction?" He glared at me with fire in his eyes, and then in a booming voice declared, "It is because when I go online shopping I keep getting ripped off because I can't take advantage of certain country-specific offers. Furthermore, I yearn to watch The Joy of Painting on YouTube, but it's only available in the US. By destroying all nations I can end this tyranny." "But Prince S," I said, "if you had Surfshark that wouldn't be a problem. You can use its servers in other countries to get around region-specific restrictions online. And with its advanced encryption, you can do so in complete privacy." "I don't know," said the science pirate. "That sounds expensive." "Not a bit of it," I said. "Visit Surfshark and enter the code JAGO at checkout. You can get 83% off a 2-year plan, plus 3 months extra free, plus a 30-day money-back guarantee. Surfshark can be used on an unlimited number of devices, too." "Well, I'm convinced," said Shadrach. "I'm dismantling my organization forthwith. Hooray!" So that's Surfshark. Gives you security online, helps you save money, gets around regional restrictions, and causes supervillains to mend their evil ways. I feel like I talk about the Jubilee Line east of Westminster a lot, but I hardly ever even mention the other section. I think it's time to rectify that, don't you? So as you may be aware, the Jubilee Line opened in 2 sections. The new and exciting bit that everyone talks about opened in 1999 and involved a lot of complicated construction work, as well as some very nifty design features. But there's also the older section that opened in 1979 from Stanmore to Westminster, and there's quite a story behind that. Actually, the story of this bit goes back to 1932, long before the Jubilee Line was even thought of. Look at Stanmore Station, and the architecture is a dead giveaway as to its original owner. This style of architecture is the work of Charles W. Clark of the Metropolitan Railway. It's known as the domestic style, with an obvious arts and crafts influence. So it clues us in that this section of line was built by the Metropolitan Railway. This style of architecture was very deliberately designed to evoke the idea of a house in the countryside. You see, most railways were authorised to acquire more land than they needed during construction, just in case, but they had to give the excess back afterwards. Not so for the Metropolitan, who wound up with lots of land to the northwest of London, so they got into property development, not only building the railways, but towns for them to serve. This area became known as Metroland. The railway portrayed these new suburbs as affordable homes in the countryside, yet within easy reach of the city. The promotional campaign was so successful that the area was soon, well, not the countryside anymore. The story of how the Metropolitan Railway expanded from Baker Street to the northwest of London is a long and complicated one that's liable to overwhelm the entire video if I go into too much detail. For now, what you need to know is that in 1868, a line was opened from Baker Street to Swiss Cottage, which was the Metropolitan and St John's Wood Railway. In 1872, Sir Edward Watkin took over as chairman of the Metropolitan Railway and pursued a policy of aggressive expansion. Branch lines started being built out into the countryside to pull commuters into London. The line from Wembley Park to Stanmore was the last of these, opening in 1932. It was the only branch of the Metropolitan Railway to be electrified from the start. It was also the first line the company had opened since 1899, and a major reason for that was that the Charing Cross, Euston and Hampstead Railway had opened an extension of their own to nearby Edgware. The CCEHR was owned by the Underground Group, and they were already making plans to extend further into the suburbs. The Met decided they had to act, and so built their fancy new line to Stanmore, complete with a bus service to surrounding areas in the hope of poaching traffic from the Underground. This was, in retrospect, not a smart move. What's important to note at this point is that at the time the Metropolitan Railway was not part of the Underground. It was a main line. What this meant was that it had to charge fares in line with other mainline companies, while the Underground could set theirs deliberately low. As a result, travelling from Stanmore into London could cost over twice as much as the same trip from Edgware. In fact, the buses wound up backfiring, so to speak. in that people were using them to travel from the Metropolitan to the Underground. Passenger numbers on the Stanmore branch were so low in the early days that a single coach like this one was sufficient to carry them. Meanwhile, at the other end of the railway, the Metropolitan was having the opposite problem. All these branch lines were feeding passengers into London all right, more than the line could handle. Fortunately, help was at hand, but not in a form that was entirely welcome. In 1933, the London Passenger Transport Board took over most of the Underground lines, including the Metropolitan Railway. The Met protested, but to no avail. The Board, or London Transport to give it its more familiar name, looked at the situation in the north-western suburbs. The line to Edgware was already badly overcrowded. The obvious solution was to divert passengers onto the underused Metropolitan line, but there was already a bottleneck at Finchley Road and no way of getting extra trains beyond there. The Bakerloo line had extra capacity though. If anything, it was also underused. So a plan was drawn up to build a new section of line, extending from Baker Street to Finchley Road. From here it would take over 2 of the Metropolitan Railway's 4 tracks and the entire Stanmore branch. As well as the new tunnel, the stations and signals had to be overhauled. One very visible change was the lowering of the platforms to accommodate the much lower Bakerloo line trains. As a result, the platforms from Finchley Road to Stanmore are higher than floor level for Bakerloo or Jubilee Line trains, but lower than the Metropolitan floor level. The new Bakerloo service opened in 1939. But as one problem was solved, another one arose. Remember I mentioned that Finchley Road on the Metropolitan line was a bottleneck? Well, now Baker Street on the Bakerloo line was the bottleneck, as trains converged there from Watford Junction and Stanmore. Following the Second World War, things only got worse. A lot of companies had moved from the city to the West End in the wake of bombing. The Bakerloo line trains between Baker Street and Oxford Circus were overcrowded and there was no capacity to add any more. The line that would become the Victoria Line was in the planning stages, and whatever form it was going to take, it was very clear that it was going to put even more strain on the Bakerloo. So a new line was proposed in 1964, which was to be called the Fleet Line. It was to take over one of the Bakerloo branches, though whether it would be the Stanmore or Watford Junction branch was uncertain at the time. From there it would run to Bond Street, Green Park and Charing Cross, which in those days was known as Trafalgar Square. Then it would continue through the city as far as either Fenchurch Street or Tower Hill, with the possibility of extending further east. I made a series of videos on the plans for the Fleet Line, the first of which should be popping up in the corner about now. The new line was planned in stages. Stage 1 would be Stanmore to Charing Cross, Stage 2 from Charing Cross to Fenchurch Street, and Stage 3 from there to wherever. While London Transport were pretty sure they wanted to run a line to Charing Cross, nobody was really sure what would happen from there on. In the 1960s, the docks in East London were running down, and the government weren't at all certain what to do with them. In other words, East London was liable to undergo a dramatic change in the next few decades, and the transport needs of the area would depend on what form that change took. So in 1971, approval was given for Stage 1 of the new line, while Stage 3 was still under consideration. The stations that Stage 1 would serve were all pre-existing ones, but almost all required significant expansion to cope with the anticipated growth in traffic. The exception was Green Park, which had already been rebuilt for the arrival of the Victoria Line in 1968. In 1977, the incomplete line was renamed the Jubilee Line to commemorate the Silver Jubilee of Queen Elizabeth II, at the behest of Horace Cutler, head of the Greater London Council. This caused much wailing and gnashing of teeth at London Transport headquarters, as they'd already started printing material referring to the line as the Fleet, and what was the point of calling the line the Jubilee Line when it wasn't going to open until 1978? On the 1st of May 1979, Stage 1 of the Jubilee Line was opened by Prince Charles, and it was a great success, with obvious improvements being noted within 6 months. Overcrowding on the Bakerloo line was eased, with 50% of Bakerloo passengers south of Baker Street switching to the Jubilee. The old Stanmore branch saw a 10% increase in traffic as well, along with a 50% increase in train frequency. And so they all lived happily ever after. Hello all, I hope you enjoyed this overcrowded tale from the tube. If you did, you may wish to click the like button. There's also a dislike button, but you don't need to worry about that. You could, of course, subscribe for more videos like this. I'd like, as always, to thank my donors on Ko-fi and Patreon. You are the Fleet line to my Bakerloo line. And I'll see you all again very soon for another tale from the tube. Oh wait, before I go, don't forget to check out the link in the description below to take advantage of Surfshark's generous offer. See you soon!